This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, again, we're not talking politics tonight. We're talking about Alabama history. And we've got Dr. Karl Stegall, the legendary Methodist minister, back on for another week's show on this, y'all don't mind. He has written the best book. And I told you last week, we spent a lot of time on his legendary career as one of the premier Methodist ministers in state history, especially the last 28 years as pastor of the legendary, iconic First Methodist Church here in Montgomery. And he's been in the career 40 years. But he has written the best book called An Amazing Alabama. It's an amazing book, and I'd spent 4 or 5 hours with it last night. Being an Alabama historian and knowing Alabama history like I love it, he has captured the state so well. He spent a full year of his life. He and his wife Brenda traveled with him most of the time, traveling the state. I'm going to show y'all this book. See, Ronnie, see if you can get a close-up of it. Amazing Alabama. Now, those of you who love Alabama, this man knows Alabama history. He intertwines the sports legends of the state and his experiences in life, not just his growing up in the Black Belt, but his years here in Montgomery. But he traveled the entire state, and those of us who've been around it a long time realize, you know, what a beautiful state we have. And I'm so glad he did this. This is just an amazing book. Dr. Stegall, good to have you on again this week. And let's just talk about the book. Let's get right into it. Tell our viewers again about why you decided to write it and travel the state. Was it for a year or 2 years?
Thank you, Steve. About a year and a half. Yeah.
I thought it was.
Well, it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and all of us were quarantined and told not to get out of our home. And Brenda and I both decided we would do that. But I was driving her nuts staying at home, and I called my doctor one day, Dr. Bill Cumbie, and I said, Bill, I'm about to go crazy staying at home. I can't go out. I like to go places. And he said, well, Karl, you can go anywhere you want to go just so you don't mingle with crowds or get with people. So Brenda would pack our lunch each day, and we would get up early in the morning, sometime before daylight. We would go to North Alabama. Sometimes we'd go to South Alabama, West Alabama, extreme East Alabama. So that's what motivated right in the middle of the pandemic.
So you didn't just like have a game plan that you would start in North Alabama and travel. You just wake up and say, Brenda, let's go to the Wiregrass. Or let's go to North Alabama.
Yeah.
Y'all would plan it a week ahead of time or something?
Well, a little bit of that. We were standing in the water at Gulf Shores, and we thought about North Alabama and the Tom Bibby River, the Tennessee line, and we decided we would move upward.
So you did start in the south and moved upward.
Yeah, but then we mixed it up a little bit, but mostly we started in the south and moved to the north.
You know, you capture so much history and knowledge about the state, even going into why little towns were named what they were, slap out and that sort of thing. Let's start with the coastline. Your first chapter starts around the Florida line, around our beautiful coast, entitled The Amazing Coastline of Alabama. Tell us some of your best memories of those towns there. Like you include the Baldwin County towns. Y'all spent a lot of time in Baldwin County.
Sure they did. Well, you know, Baldwin County is larger than Rhode Island. It's one of the largest counties east of the Mississippi River. And I was fascinated with things I discovered that I never thought about before. The 51-mile coastline is just simply amazing for us in Alabama, and we sometimes take it for granted. I was coming back from Houston, Texas not long ago, and my wife and I got off when we got to the Texas-Louisiana line and drove through Louisiana and Mississippi. And I gained a new appreciation as I drove through the coastline of Mississippi and Louisiana and how beautiful the coastline is in Alabama. It's not surprising that great families from Mississippi like the Mannings, Archie his sons, they buy properties in Gulf Shores and Orange Beach and over in the 38 because the coastline is so magnificent.
I did not know that. So our coastline is prettier than Mississippi's and Louisiana's. What makes it different, I wonder?
Yeah.
What do you think makes a difference?
It makes a huge difference. It really is.
Uh-huh.
And people are really attracted. If you go down to Orange Beach, or you go down to Gulf Shore today, or you get up in Pensacola, you'll see a lot of car tags from Mississippi and Louisiana.
Uh-huh. They sure are. Now what you did you go to all those towns you wrote about, like in Alberta and Robertsdale and Flomaton and all that area? You and Brenda actually went to those towns.
No, I went to all of them. I really did.
And so when you were traveling through, you would tell the history of that town.
Yeah.
What I found so interesting, you remember who was from there, whether they were a movie star or athlete or football player or singer.
That's
I mean, you
right.
would intertwine those towns. Every town just about had somebody, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting to meet the people, and they would tell you stories. And they would tell me things I found to be very interesting. When I was up in Jackson County, extreme North Alabama, near Scottsboro, I went to a little town called Princeton. And when I drove into the town, everything was closed except the post office. And they had a sign, "Welcome to the Curly Putnam State Park." And Curly Putnam wrote two of the greatest country music songs that have been written. One was "Green, Green Grass of Home," and the other one was a song that George Jones recorded, "I Stopped Loving Her Today." And I found that in the middle of, just way out in rural
Scottsboro,
Jackson County. Yeah.
Hey, Karl, you talking about that? You bring out one of the best stories how when Hank Williams was buried here, how 22,000 people came out here to the cemetery. What cemetery is out here in Montgomery? He's buried at out there. Hank Williams is buried in what cemetery is it?
Yeah.
Out there. But there's some country singer that came here and would sing at his grave.
Alan Jackson.
And you bring up, he came to concert up here too.
Yeah, my daughter told me about that. My younger daughter, Carmen, told me that whenever he appears in the greater Montgomery area, Alan Jackson will always come by the cemetery here on Lower Wetumpka Road, and he would at midnight sing "Midnight in Montgomery."
I'm just amazed at how much Alabama history you know in that book. Like, you'll talk about some town, but you would also come back with great stories. I found the one about how the Bay Minette people stole the county records from Daphne in Baldwin County. Tell that story.
Well, there was a disagreement of where the county seat should have been held many years ago, and the people in Daphne thought it was supposed to be there, and people in Bay Minette thought it was supposed to be in Bay Minette. And the legislature got involved, and they ruled in the favor of moving everything to Bay Minette. And the people of Daphne felt like they had stolen it from them. So they had a big furor, and they claimed it in the middle of the night. They went down and got the records in Daphne and brought them back to Bay Minette.
What I love too is, like, you go from one town to the other, like you go to Foley, and you talk about what great players were from there. Like Stake Stabler was from Foley, and so was Julio Jones were from Foley. And as you traveled up the state, you knew of the political, the musical, and the sports history of every town. So let's travel up the western part of the state towards your original home of Livingston in the Black Belt. As you leave Baldwin and you came through Washington, you comment about Washington being the oldest county in the state. Tell the history of Washington County.
Well, we tend to forget our history of being a part of the Mississippi Territory at one time, and since Washington County bordered on Mississippi, what we know today as Mississippi, and St. Stephen's, the first capital. Well, it really wasn't a capital, but it was on the verge of being the capital.
Yeah. It's totally gone now.
Yeah, that's right. Because of that, Washington became the very first county in Alabama. Another thing I found interesting about counties of Alabama. And Jimmy Raines wrote me a note about this. 10 counties came out of Henry County. Now,
You bring that out in the book.
Yeah.
You bring that out in the book, how it did.
But Jimmy knew about it, and he called me and congratulated me. He said, I didn't know you were aware of this. Of course, the last one of the 10 that was moved out of Henry County was Houston County, Dothan.
It was the last county founded in the state.
Yeah.
And you bring that out.
Yeah.
Pike was part of Henry.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, you bring that out in the book.
Yeah.
How there were 8 or 10 counties
Yeah.
that were all came out of Henry County. I guess Henry County had a lot of Georgia roots from it and everything.
Yeah.
But moving on up the left part of the state, you bring out the McCorkadales in Clark County, and you bring out how much forestry land that came obvious to you as you traveled, especially through the Black Belt in southwest Alabama. It's all forest land.
That's right. Well, it's amazing how big the timber industry is in Clark County alone. I think they once had 3 major mills there near the river in Clark County alone. But then you've got Escambia County that's also very, very strong. You've got Washington County, you've got Monroe County, all of those are heavy timber lands.
What's your best memory of Monroeville, the Harper Lee stuff? It's such a literary town.
Well, when you think about Truman Capote and Harper Lee both coming from that particular town, and supposedly her novel To Kill a Mockingbird today is read by more high school students than any other novel that's been ever written, and that's pretty remarkable.
I had Dr. Wayne Flint on my show, sitting where you're sitting, a few months ago, and he had written a book, Afternoons with Harper Lee.
Yeah.
It's great book, but anyway, he talks about having spent the last 8 years of her life and how famous Alice was. And you brought that out last time, and I was talking to a lady who grew up in Monroeville earlier today. You know, Alice Lee was a story in herself, and as you know, was a pillar in the Methodist Church in the state. Very active in the Methodist Church. Lived to practice law to 100 years old.
I think she lived, 102?
Yeah, something like that.
She was very active to the end, and she was more outgoing and more in public than
Harper.
her sister, Harper.
They called her Nell over there in Monroe.
That's right.
Now come on back up to your home area. Now Brenda was from Escambia, around Flomaton, and you bring that out in the book about where her home was. You know, they found oil down there in the last 50 years. A lot of oil down there. But people don't realize that in Escambia and
well, I tell you, they found it twice. When I was a boy and I traveled down 29 and 31 highway, headed down toward Flomaton, they used to have a little sign in Pollard that said Alabama's first oil field. And that was in the late 50s and 60s. And it remained there, that little sign on the west side of the highway announcing Pollard as the first oil field in many years. Well, it would have been great if all of us could have projected what was going to happen, because they discovered oil at Pollard, but years and decades later they came back and found oil in Jay, Florida, right across the line, in Bruton and Flomaton, and in areas all around in Escambia County.
You mentioned moving over to the southeast part of the state. I found it interesting about you and Brenda's first church was in Andalusia, and you just mentioned a while ago you kept Dr. Bill Cumbie as your doctor over all these years because he was with you when your first daughter was being born there in Andalusia.
Well, I have a warm, heartwarming story to me about that Cumbie family. When we moved to Andalusia in 1967, in our first appointment, Dr. Gary Cumbie was my doctor. He delivered our baby. And I remember he charged me $25, and I was making $3,000 a year, so he sent the $25 back to me when I paid him. But I found
But the guy who's a doctor now, his daddy was a doctor
That's
too.
right. So I come to Montgomery, and Bill Cumbie's a member of our church here, and he took care of me for the last 20 years.
So Bill Cumbie's actually in Montgomery. He's not in Andalusia.
That's right.
Okay, that was confusing me when you were talking about Bill Cumbie, because I knew the Cumbies were from Andalusia. So his daddy, Gary Cumbie, was the one who delivered your first daughter in
That's
Andalusia.
right.
So his son Bill settled here to practice medicine.
That's right.
Now Bill's getting up in age some too now, isn't he? About 65 or 70 years old.
That's right. And his mother was from Pike County, Troy, your hometown.
They were. I knew the Boatners.
That's right.
They were all kids. I knew the Cumbies. They would come visit Troy when I was a little boy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Troy Andalusia connections.
Oh, it is.
The
Three-night
Anthonys.
streets, too.
The same three-night street story. You know the story of that. So you cover every historical aspect of the state, but you also do a good job of telling what Jimmy Rain has done in Abbeville. About that drugstore. What did they call it down there? You said the drugstore, and he had it in 1950s. He put it in 1950s style. Jimmy Rain, the drugstore in Abbeville.
Oh, yeah.
The drugstore in Abbeville that you tell the story of in the book. How he's redone downtown Abbeville.
Yeah, you know, Jimmy has done a lot to establish civic pride in Abbeville. That particular county, Henry County, has not been thriving financially or business-wise except for his business.
Right.
But I must say, not only has he done great things for Auburn University, but Jimmy Rain has done remarkable things for that hometown. He didn't have to build that nice restaurant down there.
No.
He didn't have to furnish it with $1 million worth of antique furnishings. But he wanted to do something. He's done it for the schools. He's done it for the church down there, the Abbeville First United Methodist Church. He just invested a lot of his resources in brightening the spirits of people in Abbeville.
Karl, moving to Dothan now, you talk about Dothan and the circle and everything. Did y'all spend much time in Dothan?
Yeah, we did. I was fascinated with Dothan. I had forgotten until I read about the fact that they claimed that 75% of all the peanuts grown in the United States are grown within 100 miles of Dothan, and that's rather remarkable.
It is.
75% of all the peanuts in the nation grown around Dothan. And also, I had an opportunity to serve as an interim minister at First United Methodist Church of Enterprise.
You spend a lot of time in the book on Enterprise.
Yeah, and that is one of the finest towns in Alabama. They take great pride in economic development. They take pride in their schools. That was one of the most inspirational places I visited. They got a beautiful new high school there. If you haven't been in there, you need to go in it.
Enterprise has always been a thriving community, but they really are really growing exponentially currently. I mean, it's the fastest growing town in the Wiregrass. And it's because of that school. People settle there, all the Rucker people, the retired military people settle in Enterprise because of what you talking about, what I knew growing up. Enterprise High School, or Enterprise school system, will rank in the top 10 of public schools on any survey you see.
Yeah.
They got a lot of pride in their school there. And you
really
mentioned that time about the playing Jeff Davis at Crampton Bowl, and you sitting by a guy from Enterprise, and they came here and won the state championship. Do you remember that night you talked about the Crampton Bowl thing?
Yeah.
In your book about how you were sitting there at Crampton Bowl, and some man at Enterprise looked at you and says, Dr. Stegall, I hope this is a good time somebody rob a bank at Enterprise tonight.
That's right. Coach Bacon had a team and went on the state championship, and he did it twice, you know. And they won the state 7A basketball championship a couple of years ago. They were underdogs, but they take a lot of pride in their school.
Did you spend any time in Eufaula?
Yeah, I did. You're the political expert, but I've always found it fascinating that six governors came out of
it's amazing.
Barber County.
It's amazing, home of governors.
And that's rather amazing to me.
Something in the water down there. I told Jerry Beasley one day, I said, Jerry, what is it about Barber County, all y'all be governor? He said, we had nothing else to do. We had to make it, that's the only way we could make a living. That's what he told me. Well, he was cutting up. But you're right, going back to Chauncey Sparks, Comer. I mean, for a county less than 30,000 people to have 5 or 6 governors. And the closest county to it has 2. Big counties like Montgomery and Tuscaloosa and some others that have 2. That's the most any other county has, is 2.
Well, it's a beautiful city. They take great pride in their city. They got some beautiful homes there. Not far, it's right there on the river. And that makes it very special for retirees.
You spent a lot of time in Lee County, Opelika and Auburn.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's a booming place right now. I tell you, no place in our state is growing more rapidly now than Auburn and Opelika.
Right. It shows up. Baldwin's growing a lot.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And the rocket city of Huntsville and Limestone.
Yeah, that's amazing. If you go about 65 today and get to Decatur and you look on both sides of the highway, but mainly to the east, they're moving dirt like crazy because there's so much industry coming into Madison County, but some coming into the greater Decatur area as well.
Limestone too.
And it's they are building like crazy in the Decatur Huntsville area right now.
I bet you that was an eye opener for people from our part of the state to travel to Huntsville and realize what's going on up there. It's like it's really not part of Alabama. It's like a part of the research triangle of California and the North Carolina and the Silicon Valley of California was just placed there. I spoke to the Huntsville Rotary Club about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, and I preceded my speech by asking them, because it was a very big audience. I'd never seen a Rotary Club that big. Had over 150 people there, Rotarians. And I asked them, I said, how many of y'all here are scientists, have an engineering degree? Mm-hmm. Half of them raised their hand. I said, how many of y'all have a PhD and a master's in engineering? Half of them in there. Can you imagine? Do you know the per capita income and education level in Huntsville is the highest in the country, of the Southeast? There's no city in the Southeast that has as high an education level.
Well, the amazing thing, they claim in the late 1940s there were only 13,000 people living in Huntsville.
Yeah.
And today it's become the biggest city in Alabama. And then you got the area out there at Madison, and you got Harvest to the north, where Sparkman High School is located. That area is really booming.
Well,
right.
did you find it difficult to drive up there because the traffic was so horrendous? I mean, I'm used to driving in Montgomery or Troy traffic, and when I go to Birmingham, or especially Huntsville, it's like, did it confuse y'all? Was it too busy, or did y'all find it too hectic when you were up there, you and Brenda? How long did y'all stay up there?
Oh, we spent several nights there off and on over the year, but one thing I would also want to say about Huntsville, we spent the night at the Western Hotel there, and when we got to eat breakfast next morning, I looked around and there were people dressed in Middle Eastern garb. There were people from Central and South America there. There were people from different countries of Europe. So they are attracting a lot of people beyond the boundaries of the state of Alabama.
Karl, let's move back, if you would, to your home here in Montgomery. Let's move back home to Montgomery for our last 3 or 4 minutes of the show. And you talk about Montgomery because you spent most of your adult life here, 40 years in the ministry in Whitfield and St. James, and 28 years as First Methodist. If someone was coming to see you and visiting Montgomery, people cannot grasp the history that's just right here where we're sitting. That's in the Rosa Parks building, and you walk up the street to Dexter Avenue. Every time I watch an inauguration, I sit there and think, what a historic place we're sitting in. If you had someone come from Minnesota, a retired Methodist minister, or somewhere from Atlanta even, and they said, Karl, you lived most of your adult life in Montgomery. Tell me about Montgomery. What are your best memories of Montgomery? How historic it is, or what?
Well, I love Montgomery, but one of the things I thought about not long ago that really jumped out at me, there are 4 individuals that were 26 years of age or younger that became world famous that came out of Montgomery. One was Martin Luther King. He was 26 years old when he came.
Came to that church at Dexter.
And then when Hank Williams moved from Butler County, made it up here, he was in high school. Uh-huh. And then you had Bart Starr, who became a legend with the Green Bay Packers. And then you had the 4th one is Millard Fuller. Uh-huh. Brenda and I went on a trip to South Africa years ago, and I was shocked when we visited certain housing developments in South Africa, everywhere you went, they had the name of Millard Fuller and Habitat for Humanity. So it's rather amazing that those 4 people. Brenda and I went to worship one day in London, England, at Westminster Abbey, one of the most famous churches in the world, and there was a little statuette over one of the entrances there that we entered of Martin Luther King. So these people, they've made names for themselves all over the world.
You gave you talk about Stegall and you gave the invocation for his inauguration at the King Church, and I think that struck you as how historic it was that day when you were giving that invocation for his inauguration.
Yeah.
At the Dexter King Church. It seemed like, to me, I could envision you sitting there and thinking about those 4 individuals, you know, the history.
Yeah.
Right there in that one section of Montgomery.
Yeah.
Right there on Dexter Avenue.
One of the advantages of serving as a minister in Montgomery is you have a lot of opportunities to give prayers and privileges of giving prayers at political events, you know. And you get to meet a lot of just wonderful, good people in all walks of life, Democrats and Republicans,
Right.
you know.
It is.
I tell you, one of the things I learned about our travel across Alabama that really came home to me, one of the things is that we have so many just good, down-to-earth, common people, Democrats and Republicans, black and white, rich and poor. Now, one thing I learned about Alabama, Steve, is that Alabamans are not too good at giving directions. You stop these people on each country road and say, how do I get to Hackleburg? Just go down here and take a left, then take a right and left, you'll be there.
I do the same thing. Folks, our guest tonight has been Dr. Karl Stegall. We've been talking about his great book. It is what I call an amazing book, An Amazing Alabama. He and his wife Brenda traveled the state for a year and a half, and he's written the best stories. If y'all like Alabama, the state of Alabama, you'll enjoy hearing these stories. We thank Dr. Stegall for being with us again this week, and we thank you viewers for watching. Hope you tune again next week. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Stegall.
Thank you, Steve.